Welcome to the Screen Director Podcast. I'm Ben Mitzi, and in this episode I sit down with director Jon Favreau about his latest film, The Jungle Book. I could have chatted to Jon for hours, but we got across a huge amount of information in the interview, particularly about his process of directing a large animated film and how that differs from live action. Thanks again to the people at Disney for helping put this together. And as always, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and if you have any feedback or comments, get in touch at screendirector.org. Now on to my conversation with Jon Favreau. Yeah, so welcome to the Screen Director Podcast, Jon.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I guess my first question we ask every director is, how did you know you wanted to be a director?
Wow. Well, I started off as an actor, and then I became a writer when I wrote Swingers. But I had wanted to direct Swingers, and I guess I always wanted to eventually become a director, thinking that maybe if I worked my way up as an actor, I could get into a position where I could get a small film made. But I thought it was going to take a whole career to get there. I thought I would be maybe an actor on Saturday Night Live, maybe a sitcom, maybe get into supporting roles in films, and then maybe once I built up a name, I would have enough. I'd have enough leverage to try to get a script made or something like that, and have a career like Woody Allen. But when I wrote Swingers, I kind of leapfrogged through all those steps and found myself in a position where I was being offered things as a director. And so, although none of those things really came together, I did work as a rewriter, and I made a living that way. And that was very helpful because I learned to sit in development meetings and get notes, talk to other directors who were giving me guidance as a writer. Mm-hmm. None of the stuff I wrote got made until Elf, and I had been working about a year as a writer on that, and then part of the deal was if it got greenlit, I would get to direct. And so I had done a small film called Made between Swingers and that, but Elf was the one that really, because of the commercial success of it and critical success, it put me on the quote-unquote lists that you have to be on to be considered as a director. And back then, a lot more movies were getting made than are getting made now. So there was an opportunity to do that, both in the independent world and with smaller studio films.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads me to The Jungle Book. And I guess, given the gamut of your career, how have you found the process directing a largely animated film? And how does that differ from live action? And I guess I'm particularly interested to know with the animated process, you can kind of see the whole film in its entirety in an edit before you actually even really go on set and shoot something.
You want a pretty complicated version of this?
Yeah.
Yes,
well,
okay. I figured it's director, so
yeah.
Okay, so just a little inside baseball. We took the front end of the animation pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was, I've been watching the way they do it at Pixar for many years, and really impressed with the work that they've done. And every time I would look or hear interviews or talk to people like John Lasseter, who I've known for many years, they would always say the same thing. I'd ask them technical questions, and they would always go back to story. Yeah. They'd say story. The visual effects, how do you do this? How do you render this? How do you play? Story. That's all they care about. And the way they explore story is they do it through both writers and a story department. So in a live action film, what tends to happen is they kind of hold back the green light. The green light is when the way it was told to me is before your green light, the studio has the gun to your head, and then once you're in production, you have the gun to the studio's head because you're off and running. So whether that's true or not, it is safe to say that a point of leverage shifts once the studio commits to making the movie, and up until the point that they greenlight the film, they limit the amount of resources they invest in something so that if they decide to back out or make a different movie, they're not caught losing a lot of dough.
Sure.
Now, if you look at the way Pixar does it, it's a much different process. They put a lot of money into pre-production. They bring on a story department to do pencil sketches, storyboards, gag ideas. Mm-hmm. They bring on writers. They bring on a production designer. They start designing environments. You could walk into rooms, and between the storyboards and the illustrations and the color studies, you really get a sense of what this movie's going to be. So they really do pre-production as though they're going to make every movie. And that's a much more expensive process. It takes more people. It requires more of a commitment. Mm-hmm. But when they do finally go forward with a movie, they have a story that's been stress tested. It has a lot more care and understanding, a lot more vision goes into it than most movies that get greenlit, live action movies.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you're working with a company like Marvel, you have a release date that you're rushing towards. You have a writer you're working with, a director. Maybe there's some illustrations being done, but there's a sense that you'll discover a certain amount of it. You try to get the script as good as you can, but you allow for the fact that you're going to probably learn something through the process. You're going to make discoveries in production. You'll edit the movie. You'll put some temporary visual effects in. You'll put it in front of an audience. You bounce it off a crowd, see if they like it. If there are parts that aren't working out, you might shoot some additional days. And so it's this organic process that progresses all the way up to release. You don't have that luxury with an animated film. With an animated film, and this is dating back to Walt Disney's days, they would sweatbox show reels. They would put together pencils, and they would really scrutinize this thing before you ever went to ink and paint. Because ink and paint was, even though it's low-tech compared to what we do today, was still a very expensive technical process. And so they never, if a scene ended up on the cutting room floor after it was inked and painted, it's still, you still talk about Snow White. There's a scene where they're scrubbing up, and you could see the outtakes, but it was a big deal that there was one whole sequence that was removed. Whereas in a live action film, sequences disappear constantly. You're constantly lopping out scenes. Sometimes reels worth of material disappear for the purpose of making a movie more playable. But that's all resources that end up on the cutting room floor. That's money that could have been invested into the film. And when you deal with a movie like Pixar or Disney Animation, you're going to see a much more precise version of planning so that you don't end up going through the expensive process of rendering these shots if they're not going to end up in the film. And so I think that the reason that the batting average is so good on animated films versus live action is because so much care is put into the front end. And that's part of what I presented as my vision for this thing as I approached the people from Disney who were interested in making this and interested in hiring me. And they agreed. And fortunately, Disney's a company that's enjoyed a lot of success through animation, through both Pixar and Disney Animation. They understood this workflow. And they committed those resources before we were greenlit. And so I had a head of story. I had a story department. I had scripts being developed. I had character tests done, animation tests to see how the talking would work, how photoreal we could get things. We had engaged MPC and then later Weta to be our partners and helping to come up with a technique. I brought on Rob Legato, who had built out the front end, and Joyce Cox, who had worked on Avatar, so we had an understanding of motion capture. Andy Jones, who is the head animator, one of the lead animators on Avatar, and who was our lead animator. And so I had a lot of people who had a lot of experience in motion capture, people who had experience in animation. And so we took so a long answer for one short question, but we planned it as though it was an animated film.
Yeah.
And then when you would normally go to layout and start laying in cameras and start moving the characters around, that's when we went to motion capture, and we treated this as though we were doing a film like Avatar.
Yep.
So with the kid, Neil Setti, who is our Mowgli, we did motion capture. We did a scratch track. We did pencils. And then when we went to the next phase, then we did a full motion capture version of the movie. On sets with the motion capture suits, we laid cameras in. We worked with Bill Pope and Rob Legato and our full crew. And we came up with a cut of the movie. And that cut of the movie looked like a video game. The video game version of the film with all the voices and all the camera angles. And once we signed off on that cut, that's when we went ahead, and that's when I took a page out of the book of Gravity. Alfonso had planned all those shots, and when he filmed his leads in there, it was almost like an element shoot. And so you already committed to camera movement, to lenses, to lighting. And by having all that information, and by having visual effects involved from pre-production through production, and there on the set, and having our cut and our editor cutting each shot in, and having everybody sign off and look each other in the eye and give the thumbs up, we knew that these elements we were shooting were going to work in a bulletproof way when it came to the photorealism. And so once we put that together, and then I looked at all the performances, did another pass at editing, and of course then you could adjust the animation and adjust what some characters are saying if something isn't working quite right. So you try to show it to crowds. It's tough because it's in such rough form. Sometimes scenes are just in pencil. Use your intuition, your experience. make some final adjustments, and then you turn sequences over, and then the magicians go to work, the visual effects people. You know, and that now you're an animation director, and Andrew Stanton actually gave me some really valuable advice. We had gone up to Pixar, talked to the Brain Trust, showed them cuts of the film. They were very helpful and cooperative. And the one piece of advice he gave me from working in live action on John Carter was have direct interaction with your animators. Oftentimes a director will deal with their visual effects supervisor, and animation will fall under that umbrella.
Yep.
But in the case of this movie, so much performance is indicated by the animators that I would have sessions just with the animators every day, if I could, several times a week, with Andy Jones, the supervisor there, and I would deal directly with the animators. I would fly out to London to deal with them in MPC. And as an actor, I could give very specific notes, and sometimes I'd actually act it out, and we would videotape me acting out the performances where I'd lip sync to the performances.
Yeah, cool.
And of course, we would use the animation. The animation would be based on cameras that we would have on the actors while they were recording their voices, oftentimes together. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to get their performance to come out a naturalism. Sometimes we would find clips from old movies that these actors were in, and I would say, look at that expression, that's the Bill Murray moment that I want there. Or see how Chris Walken was in this scene. Let's see if we could get that type of eye contact going.
So, was there something particular about translating those performances to the thing that you to the film that you found where it was a particular hurdle, but you found some way to overcome it?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, I'm kind of segueing into that. You know, we made, there were certain discoveries we made along the way. You know, we went way out of our way to get either motion capture or, you know, what ILM calls iMoCap, where you set up several cameras and you create motion capture data from video images by triangulating multiple cameras. And so we would take the performances that they actually gave us with their facial expressions and everything, for certain characters more important than others. For King Louie, who's a Gigantopithecus, a giant primate, more important than a snake, you know, than Ka for Scarlet. Yeah. But we always wanted the performance to dictate the performance of the animal, but we tried to transpose that performance through the language, the physical language that the animal would use. So a snake uses the way its body moves. One of the wolves, it would use their eyes a lot, very anthropomorphic eye movement. With the cats, like Shere Khan or Bagheera, it's more their body language. The big cats don't really use their eyebrows in the same way a human does. So we really didn't want to, overlap with the uncanny valley when it came to the expressions of the animals. Mm-hmm. But once we got a language for them, we would take the performances that the actors gave us and either lay them directly on, like with King Louie, or the animators would interpret them into the language of that particular species.
Finally, what did you learn from this film that you're going to take forward in the next project you take?
Well, I was speaking to Edgar Wright when I was making this film, and he's a wonderful friend and a fantastic filmmaker. And he noticed that he remarked that when filmmakers go through working in animation or something approximating animation, it forces them to use a different set of tools. And you see that the movies that they do after they've dealt with animation show a different style of filmmaking that's generally, as a general rule, a bit more decisive than previously. So, for example, with myself, I encourage a lot of freedom, a lot of improvisation, a lot of camera angles, and I tend to discover things on the set and even more so in the editing room and shaping it. With animation, it's very hard to do that. You have to plan ahead of time. You could allow for certain spontaneous moments, but for the most part, every blade of grass in this film is something that was set in by an artist that I've approved. Yep. Every performance, every shot, it's very mannered, and I try very hard to give it a freedom. But it forced me out of my comfort zone of allowing things to be discovered through collaboration on the set and happy accidents happening. I had to actually plan things in a way that looked like they were happy accidents. And as Edgar pointed out, when directors come out of that, you see a different version of that director. And the one he pointed out to most recently is George Miller. You know, you look at Mad Max, you look at Road Warrior, great films. You know, even Thunderdome, great, exciting, energetic, entertaining films. Then he goes off and does, works on the Babe movies and then Happy Feet. Yep. And here he comes at the other end, and Fury Road is, I would say, the finest piece of cinema he's done, and certainly the best in the Mad Max series.
Yeah, for sure.
So that level of care and planning in storyboarding, and even in talking to him about how he did it, he created this as a visual story more so than a script. There was a script, but he had reams and reams of storyboards where each moment was planned out and thought through. And it just adds to the energy of that movie, but it also makes you feel like you're sitting and observing a master director doing this tremendous piece of cinema. And the fact that it was, it came very close to winning Best Picture, and it certainly was embraced. I was around for award season. I'm involved with the Directors Guild of America, DGA.
Yep.
I got to introduce him in the film as it was nominated, and although now that the smoke has cleared, other films have won the awards, there certainly was a rousing ovation and sense of support and love of this guy. And the fact that a genre movie like Fury Road fought its way all the way through and won a slew of awards, just not the top ones, and I think rightfully so, and the editing award, and is a testament to how refined his filmmaking had become through this process of working through all these different media.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks for chatting with us. I look forward to your Fury Road.
Fantastic. Me too. Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. To find out more about our guests, please visit screendirector.org, like our Facebook page, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. I'm always keen to know what you think of the show, so if you have any comments, please email magazine@adg.org, or you can even comment anonymously on our website. Keep making great work.